presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
What was it like to be Charles Dickens and be that flawed as a human being and still have a heart as big as the world?
Coming up, I talk with Idaho author Samantha Silva about her new novel, which reimagines how Charles Dickens came up with his famous tale, A Christmas Carol. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Bah humbug, Scrooge, dead as a doornail. Those are just some of the expressions and words popularized by Charles Dickens in his iconic tale, A Christmas Carol. Hi, I'm Marcia Franklin. Dickens' story was such a hit when it was published in 1843 that it's been credited with helping encourage the revival of Christmas itself. The idea of a miser being spooked and transformed into a benevolent soul touched a chord with people about the true spirit of the holiday. As creative as A Christmas Carol was, though, it was written quickly and born out of necessity. And here to tell us more is Samantha Silva. Silva is a Boise-based screenwriter who just penned her first novel, Mr. Dickens and His Carol. It's a reimagining of how and why the prolific writer came up with the plot line that would go on to charm readers, playgoers, and eventually movie watchers alike for almost 175 years now. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcia.
I'm so glad to have you here, and thank you because we had a little ghost of TV past that got into our machines last time we tried to tape this, and you were kind enough to come back. And
I'm happy to be here again.
I really appreciate that. Sometimes the best things take a couple tries.
Or 3.
or 15 years in this instance, because
that's
how long you spent on this work, which was originally was for the movies.
That's right.
And was sold a couple times that way. And
4 times.
4 times.
Yes.
Okay. And then now is a novel. What drove you to spend the past 15 years of your life working on this story?
Well, initially a friend of mine had called and said, we ought to write an anthology ghost story movie about how Dickens came to write A Christmas Carol, because she'd heard that that's how he'd come up with the idea. Victorians, of course, were obsessed with ghost stories and sat around often at Christmas around the hearth and told them. But the more I read about it, the more I realized that wasn't at all what happened. And I liked the true story better. And I found in the true story the fodder for a conflict that I thought would make a very rich movie, now novel.
Well, let's set that scene for the true story. It's 1843. Dickens has already been very successful with works like Oliver Twist and the Pickwick Papers. But his latest serialized novel, Martin Chuzzlewit, is not doing well at all. This was based on his trip to America, actually. And he's visited, isn't he, by some people who are not too happy with the fact that he's not being successful.
That's right. Charles Dickens was really a literary rock star in his time. And he hadn't had to deal very much with failure. He really had risen like a rocket. Barnaby Rudge, the public wasn't crazy about, but American Notes for General Circulation and Martin Chuzzlewit were flops. And the true story is that his publishers, Chapman and Hall, came to him and said, we have a clause in your contract that says if how Martin Chuzzlewit does is not enough to repay the advances already made to your publishers, we can now deduct from your pay £50 sterling per month. And Charles Dickens had, by that time, a burgeoning family, a very grand house at 1 Devonshire Terrace. They lived lavishly, and he was also a great philanthropist, responsible for charities all over London, never said no to anybody, had begging letters in the mail every day. And he was also taking care of his father, John Dickens, who did in fact once go to debtor's prison, as well as his relatives, friends of relatives, people he'd never heard of claiming to have met him once. And so he was overextended. And and the loss of 50 pounds sterling per month would have ruined him. The true story is that he thought, I need a money spinner. He'd never sat down and written an entire book before. Everything had been serialized to that point, or his journalistic essays. And he wrote it in 6 weeks. Incredible. It was published on December 19th. They ran 6,000, they printed 6,000 copies, and they were sold out within the first few days, and they had to reprint them again before the new year. So although he didn't make any money on it in the moment for a variety of reasons, it was a money spinner for him ultimately.
But there was something about this true story,
yes,
that struck you, and you thought, I want to play with this a bit, and I want to make a fictionalized version of it.
I did.
What grabbed at you?
Well, first of all, Charles Dickens himself got under my skin very much as I started to read about him and read his novels with an eye toward who he was and what he was about. And I really became obsessed with him, as I think you do as a writer have to about any character that you write. I was fascinated with his complexities and his flaws, and I saw also that he had a heart as big as the world. And I wanted to write about all of those things. Well, also that Charles Dickens, the true story of his publishers coming to him and sort of demanding that he write something, or that he come up with an idea to get himself out of debt and them out of debt. That's a good story. But the fact that Dickens himself solves the problem, that's the end of the conflict, really. And I, as a storyteller and a writer, am interested in what's the central conflict that drives the story. And so I saw something very rich in the idea of his publishers coming to him and trying to blackmail him into writing a Christmas book to get them all out of debt, and Dickens refusing. I should never have my publishers telling me what it is I should write. And I'm in the middle of Chuzzlewit, and he's stranded in America at the moment, and I'm not going to leave him there. And that was that I immediately sort of could see spinning out into a tale about how Dickens refuses to be blackmailed, refuses to write a Christmas book, and then goes on a journey and himself becomes his own Scrooge, has his own Scrooge-like experience that ultimately inspires him to write the book we know as A Christmas Carol.
And that is what's I found really interesting about the book, is that Dickens himself takes on these characteristics of Scrooge, just feeling totally overwhelmed by all these people asking for money, having to write this. And one of the entities that comes into his life is a muse named Elinor, who kind of helps lift this oppression from him. Why did you want to include a muse that sparks him?
I don't think I've ever met a writer who didn't in some way believe superstitiously in the muse, whether it's a person or a place or an object, a talisman that you cannot write without. Dickens himself had a very early experience of a muse. His first love was a woman named Maria Beadnell, who features in the novel. And she decided, after a brief love affair, that he was not good enough for her. She was in a social class above Dickens. And she spurned him, told him his prospects were not good enough, and, as I say in the novel, made mincemeat of his heart. And so Dickens considered her in some way his first muse, because not only did she inspire him to write, but she also inspired him to prove himself wrong to her and to become the writer and become the success, to prove to Maria Beadnell that in fact he was good enough for her. So I think Dickens did believe in the muse, and I love the character of a muse, but I also think in many ways I've been a muse in my life, and I was interested in exploring what that is. It's great work if you can get it, to be someone who inspires an artist to create art. But the sacrifice that anyone makes as a muse is that you surrender yourself to be a projection for the artist, to be what they need in order to create. And what you surrender is your own totality as a human being, your own yearnings and ambitions and flaws and complexities. And so Elinor Lovejoy, who is the mysterious woman that Charles Dickens meets in a little square in London, he believes is his muse, I hope by the end of the novel ends up being a whole person who in fact has her own agenda, whether Dickens is aware of it or not.
And I love how you came up with the name Elinor.
I love the name Eleanor. I always have. Eleanor Roosevelt is one of my heroes, and in fact, my grandmother, who also was a devotee of Eleanor Roosevelt, once wrote her and exclaimed her admiration for Eleanor Roosevelt after Franklin had died, and Eleanor Roosevelt wrote her back and said, "Why don't you come visit me in Hyde Park?" And they spent a glorious day together.
Now, Dickens visited you in a way, didn't he, during this process?
He did. I felt very much when I started to write this story, once I understood what the story was and saw it clearly, that I would get up in the early mornings sometimes when you're much closer to your own subconscious and just take dictation. I felt very much that he was in the room with me, whispering, looking over my shoulder, and telling me what to say, and I was just writing it down. And it's so rare as a writer to have that experience. And you know, I suppose in some ways Dickens was my muse. And you feel not that you are creating them, but that you're channeling them, that you're communicating something deep that they've made you feel. And I think my kids were very young when I started writing it, thought that Dickens would just knock on the door one day and come around for dinner. He was so much a part of our lives and our conversations. And I'm famous, they tell me I'm famous for talking while I write, which Dickens did as well. And I felt always in conversation with him about the book. And so I feel, I'm not sure I can take full credit for it, because I do think that Dickens was looking over my shoulder, and I feel very grateful for that.
When you write a novel about somebody as famous as Charles Dickens is, and there's so much scholarship surrounding him, do you ever worry about the scholars picking it apart?
I do. I owe a great debt to his biographers, and who understand him in every minute detail. And I ask in my author's note that they forgive me the liberties that I've taken, and the embellishments and the reordering of facts and dates and his children, but that it was all really in the service of telling the story and writing this fan letter, which is really for me a love letter to Charles Dickens, because I think he's one of our immortals, one of our greats, and it's so important. It was so important to me to see him as a real human being, to understand what it was like to live in his skin, to walk the streets of London, to have had the traumas that he experienced as a child. As a 12-year-old, his father, John Dickens, did go to debtor's prison and took all the family with him, except for 12-year-old Charles Dickens, who was left to work at Warren's blacking factory to try to raise enough money to spring his father and family from prison, and that was a deeply traumatic experience for him.
So once you decided to turn this into a novel from a movie script, that requires a lot more detail. How did you go about your research? I know you've spent quite a few years in London with your former husband, Michael Hoffman, who was a filmmaker himself. I assume that was quite helpful in and of itself.
Yes, Mike and I lived in London 3 different times while I was working on this story. And London itself, as it was for Charles Dickens, is such an inspiration. And Victorian London still exists, largely because of the Great Fire that destroyed everything. Victorian London very much is still alive and real. And even if it's been gentrified and the streets are paved, it doesn't take much squinching of the eyes to see what it might have been 170 years ago. So London itself. And there's the Dickens Museum, which is on Doughty Street in a house where Dickens lived before they moved to the much grander one, Devonshire Terrace. And it's a wonderful, intimate museum, and there are still the bedrooms and the beds that they slept on and the chairs they sat on, and all of that is incredibly useful and inspiring. And I read voraciously. I read everything. There's so much wonderful journalism from the period. People wrote exhaustively about everything you could imagine, you know, from the markets, Covent Garden, Spitalfield, and what those were like and what people sold, to the traditions of Christmas or the courts of law. All of the, you know, anything that I wanted was available, not just through Dickens biographers, but the journalists in the period who wrote, including Dickens himself.
You mentioned that this is a love letter to Dickens. You also mentioned that you totally understand him as a whole person. he had a dark side, and he left his wife ultimately. He fell in love with an 18-year-old woman. How do you, especially with what's in the news lately, how do you juxtapose those aspects of his life with falling in love with him as well? How do you see him?
I am drawn to charismatic, brilliant, complicated, ambitious men. Maybe that's my flaw. But I saw that in Dickens, but it may be another reason I wanted to sort of investigate the relationship between the artist and the muse. But I am certainly interested in understanding the complexity of people like that. And because I think in some ways, when you see someone's flaws, it's also a way to feel close to them. Dickens was flawed as a husband, as a father. It was sometimes a happy marriage. It was a long marriage, but it was also often an unhappy marriage, and he ultimately left it, at least for an 18-year-old, I have to say. But I really wanted to engage with what was it like to be Charles Dickens and be that flawed as a human being and still have a heart as big as the world, which he did. I mean, Christmas Carol is a parable of social redemption, personal and social redemption, that is what he wanted for all humankind. And whether he was able to do that in his own life, we all fail. We all fail throughout the year, I think, and the goals we set for ourselves at the beginning. And I think it's one of the reasons that A Christmas Carol still speaks to us, because we believe in that moment of lucidity, lucidity, the gathering around the flame, the warmth of the hearth, where we can look at each other, look across at the people we love, and look into our souls and try to reconnect with our own humanity and our responsibility to those we love and to those who have less than we do. And I think that was his crystallized Christmas philosophy in the Carol that was really Dickens' philosophy throughout the year. And I think the Carol is the most sort of crystalline expression of his philosophy, but it wasn't a philosophy about Christmas. It was a philosophy about being human and what we must do, that we must lean toward the light. We must help those who have less than we do. And I think we still value that today. We still want to believe in that today. So he not only mirrors, I think, our time and our life now, but he makes it better. He improves it and gives us a sense of a way forward, that the heart we must have in order to make the world a better place, which he really believed in. He fervently believed that each of us has a responsibility to look around and see what we can do to make the world a better place.
I had to think as I read your book, and by the way, it prompted me to learn more about Dickens, which I assume is one of your goals as well.
Yes.
I had to think that he probably would have been the ultimate blogger in this day and time.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think he would have been a showrunner, definitely creating TV shows all over the place, because the serialization of his novels was very much like they were cliffhangers. I mean, people was sort of like, tune in next week to your favorite TV show, and people were obsessed with them. When Queen Victoria first became queen, I think, or maybe around when Dickens was writing his first novel in 1936, there was a literacy rate of 50% in England. By the time she died in 1901, it was 97%. And Charles Dickens really understood, it was one of the themes and ambitions of his work, that he would bridge that gap between the people who couldn't read and the people who could, because he believed so much in education as a way to become, to live up to our full potential.
What was Christmas in those days? Because you allude to this in the book. People were just really starting to celebrate Christmas again. So this idea really that he would write A Christmas Carol was a newish thing, the re-celebration of Christmas. It had either fallen out of fashion or really hadn't been celebrated much prior to that, right? And the monarchs, some of them were trying to bring it back.
Yes, 200 years before, the Puritans had really pretty much crushed it. They didn't think that Christmas should be a happy time and that people should be singing carols. And so carols literally went underground. The singing of Christmas carols went underground. They wanted solemn hymns to be sung and for Christmas to be a somber time. And so all of these things were just coming to the fore again. And Victoria had married Albert, who brought the tradition of the Christmas tree inside the house to England, which they'd never done before. And several of the German traditions around Christmas came to England. But so it's a confluence of events. Dickens doesn't create this. He doesn't create those sort of new, the reinvigoration of the idea of Christmas. But he does infuse all of us, his readers, and certainly Victorian London of his time, with the spirit of Christmas, which again is his philosophy about what Christmas is really for, which is that moment of reflection and recollection and remembrance and a re-energizing ourselves to make the world a better place.
Coincidentally, at around the same time that your book was published, a movie came out, a feature film called The Man Who Invented Christmas, based on another book about Dickens. What was that like to have this similar story coming out at the same time as your own book?
Well, it's a great irony, I think, that their movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas, was adapted from a nonfiction book about Dickens writing the carol, and they ended up as a movie, and mine began as a screenplay. The fictional version of Dickens writing the carol ends up as a book. So I am aware of the irony of it, and after having 4 heartbreaking near misses with the big screen, I did decide to adapt my story into a novel. But my belief, my fervent belief, is that more is more for everyone, and that as with Austen, as with Shakespeare, there is a voracious appetite for Dickens. We love William Thackeray, but we don't buy Thackeray tea towels and figurines every single year and hang ornaments on our tree. I think Dickens is evergreen, and it will never stop. He will never stop speaking to us, both in the rich tapestry of characters that he creates, who are people we all know now, and they are also who we are, deep in our own psyche. We all have a little bit of Scrooge in us, and a little bit of Martin Chuzzlewit, and a little bit of Miss Jellyby. And I think that he, as well as giving us that tapestry, that extraordinary, vivid, colorful, containing everything tapestry of what it is to be human and alive, he also again reflects our time to us and provides a mirror for us to look and see, oh, these things are still happening. We haven't resolved them. They are still the fundamental problems that we face and that we must solve in order to go forward as human beings.
Do you think you'll ever see the movie?
I don't know. It is heartbreaking for me, but I wish them the very best. And again, I think people will never stop reimagining Christmas Carol, whether it's on stage every year in every English-speaking theater throughout the world that we know about, or creating other plays, musicals, masterpiece theater. Dickens will always be with us, and there will ever be opportunities to reimagine him and his stories.
You've had something exciting happen. A copy of your book made it into the hands of the great grandson of Dickens himself. And he even signed it, right?
That was so thrilling for me. A friend of mine, David Kirkpatrick, who used to run Paramount, he said, oh, I'm going to a one-man show that the great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens, Gerard Dickens, does every year, and I'm taking a copy of your book and I'm having him sign it for you. And that came out of nowhere. I didn't expect that at all. And he wrote in the book, which I have now and will always be one of my treasured possessions, thanks for keeping Charles Dickens alive. So I feel very honored.
Well, let's talk about what's next for you. You, at the same time all of this was happening, right up towards publication, you got word that movie script that you had written had been given an award through the Sun Valley Film Festival for you to direct and produce it, and you did that. It's set up in Stanley, right, at Redfish Lake?
Yes, that's right. It's based on a true story a friend told me who used to run Redfish, about a failing marriage and a young woman who loses her boyfriend and brother in a hiking accident. But it was a kind of an extraordinary year for me. I had this book finally, and it was having a life in the world. And then in March, I found out about the Sun Valley Film Festival Award, and suddenly I was going to be making a short film and directing, which I'd never done before. And at the same time, within a month of each other, I lost my stepmother and my mother. And so it's been a year of best of times, worst of times, I have to say. But I am so grateful for the good and for the opportunities that have been given me, both to have this book be realized and be born into the world. It means a great deal to me. But it was also extraordinary to direct a film for the first time. And after being in my room alone for so many years as a writer, it was wonderful to be on a movie set where collaboration is everything. And everyone who's there, the gaffer, the grip, the director of photography, everyone is there to elevate your story, the words on the page, and make them jump off the screen. And that was a rich and rewarding experience for me that I had not anticipated.
And you have a 2-book deal, as
Yes.
I understand it, from your publisher. So is there another book already inside of you? Do you know the direction you're going?
I think I do, yes, and I would be I'm too superstitious to talk about it, but I think it's fair to say that it will be historical fiction, and it will be about another figure who is important, I think, to the modern world.
And what do you hope people take away from your first novel?
I hope if they haven't read A Christmas Carol that they'll pick it up and read it. But I also hope that they will stop and think about and revel in their own blessings and use that as a point of reflection about the world we live in and what they care about most and how they can make it better and help other people live up to their potential, help people who have less live up to their potential.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be here, and good luck. I really look forward to reading your next novel as well.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Samantha Silva. She's a Boise-based screenwriter whose first novel is Mr. Dickens and His Carol. To learn more, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.